us that. Our first speaker this morning is Dr. Maia Sauren, who has worked on international radio frequency safety standards, taught English to refugees, performed in the circus, and licked a lot of dinosaur bones. But she seems to be best known for creating the hipster map of Melbourne. Welcome, Maia.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, there we go. That's working. Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm going to start with a story about my childhood. When I was a child, I split my head open on the hills of Armageddon. This isn't a metaphorical head or a metaphorical Armageddon. I really did live in Israel, overlooking the plain of Al-Megiddo, which, if you've seen Good Omens, you probably get a few more of the extra references. Al-Megiddo was a particularly highly contested piece of land because it controlled a lot of the access from Asia to the rest of the world. So there were a lot of battles there, and eventually through the English translation and the way language works, it became known as Armageddon in the Bible. Here's another way of telling the same story. I've got scars on the back of my head from when I was rushed to hospital during an air raid in Israel. It was during an air raid. Here's another way to tell the same story. I fell over when I was 5. There's a lot of different kinds of ways to tell the same truth. That doesn't make the truth any different or any more or less accurate. It just changes how you represent it and what it means to other people. So my day job is all about different kinds of truth. I'm a consultant, which means actually most of my days doing corporate relationship therapy. And most of therapy is understanding truth in different ways and helping other people understand what the truth is in a lot of different ways. Also, a lot of Post-it notes. There's a lot of Post-it notes in my life. You know, I have a job for a reason. Imagine you're the CEO of a large bank and you finally bought into the idea that the agiles are the future. And, you know, you've convinced your board, you've convinced your leadership team, all the people in your world, you know, they're ready to accept this, that we need to change and we can no longer do things the way we're doing because the organization isn't sustainable in that way anymore. Great. Yep, your leadership team's bought into it. You know who hasn't bought into it? Priyanka, the app developer. And Andrew, the middle manager. And Gary, who's still keeping the COBOL together with bubble gum and paddle pop sticks. And he's like 3 months from retirement, and they don't make Garys anymore. Yeah. Some of us, we're future Garys. So the bank hires some expensive consultants to execute the CEO's vision and to explain to Priyanka and Andrew and Gary why they should buy into the agiles and why they really do need continuous development and deployment and something called microservices. Yeah. Ooh, yeah. So my job is to talk to Priyanka and Andrew and Gary and make their lives as painless as possible. Now, in a previous life, I gratuitously had people take photos of me wearing a lab coat and dramatic lighting. I'm even holding like a screwdriver there. Actually, very little of my PhD involved mechanical work, but you know. I did my PhD in the area of mobile phone safety standards, specifically in radio frequency safety. Now, in most of the world, certainly in anything involving the scientific community, mobile phones are safe. Radio frequency is safe in general, certainly in the way that we use it. Not everyone thinks that. A lot of people still think that mobile phones are going to give you all kinds of horrific side effects, including do that to your children. That's not what the science says, incidentally. Okay, so caveat, radio frequency safety, as well as vaccination, as well as climate science, all suffer from the same kind of PR problems. Now, I'm sure you, like me, have a lot of opinions about safety and vaccination and climate science and the agiles and consulting. And if you would like to have conversations about all the ways in which I'm wrong about those things, I'm very happy to have those with you, but please don't bring them up as a question at the end of this talk. Don't make me unleash Chris Neugebauer on you. So the main issue here is that there's a lot of overwhelming and very clear evidence that says, actually, vaccinations are massively effective, and RF is safe. And there's also evidence that says Agile works as a way to improve your business. I know. But there is always going to be a percentage of the population that doesn't agree, and it doesn't matter what the facts say. And sometimes that matters. You know, other people don't like cheesecake. I don't understand, but okay. But somebody who doesn't vaccinate their children, they're putting other people in danger. They're putting the entire community in danger. Somebody who lobbies against mobile phone towers being added to their suburb, they're making everyone's reception more crappy. And a Priyanka that doesn't want to show to stand-ups and thinks the whole thing is a giant hoax is actually making the organization's ability to execute anything worse. The issue isn't that she's wrong. The issue isn't that these people disagree with each other. The issue is that the group can't effectively function when some part of the group doesn't go along with what's going on, whether they agree with it or not. Okay, so who's heard of the Overton Window? Yeah, a lot of hands go up. Cool. Once upon a time, and actually still, the Overton Window was named after Joseph Overton, who came up with this concept of what is possible to talk about in the political sphere. And the point that Joseph Overton was making is that politicians are limited in what policy ideas they can support, because anything outside a very narrow window will just get them thrown out of office and won't get them re-elected. Yeah. That's true. It's much more interesting when we think of it in terms of what is normal in a group and what a group considers acceptable and normal to think about. And groups have different cultures, and in some cultures it's okay to make certain kinds of jokes, and in some groups it isn't. And in some groups it's really okay to just assume that testing is what you do, and that pairing is, of course, a thing that we do here. That's not always true everywhere. Now, who here actually has meaningful relationships that they still maintain with people they knew at school? Yeah, awesome. How do you do that? Maybe I'll find you separately. No, a lot of people actually still do that, but for most people it takes some work, because most of us have a few identity changes as we go through, and a lot of the relationships we had around school are legacy relationships. Yeah, you know, they're still meaningful, they still serve their purpose, and some of us still have a long, we know these people, we don't cut them out necessarily, but we don't necessarily have anything in common anymore. We've moved, they've moved. What we consider acceptable has changed, and that's true both in the political sphere and in the individual sphere and in the group sphere. It's a lot easier to think about this when we think about what is it that makes a group and what is it that makes a group normal. There's a lot of different ways to think about it, but calibrating a group to a different kind of normal is a really hard thing to do. It's also a really easy thing to do, because brains are not that smart. Brains are capable of doing all kinds of amazing things. They're also very easily manipulated. But changing the normal and eventually changing what a group thinks is acceptable, I mean, this is how we gag. This is how women got the vote. This is how we got to a situation where we have an acknowledgement of country at the start of an event. This is how we got pronoun stickers at conferences. Some of these issues are clearly further along than others, but they're just tools. All of these things are ways to move the conversation, are tools, and we've seen them work through history, and you've seen them work in your own life. Here's an example of one of those tools being used. Once upon a not so very long ago, 2013-14, there was this really, actually very effective campaign, the anti-vaccination campaign, called I Immunise, and it ran in Western Australia, and there's a few others running around in Australia still that are based on that. Now, Australia has a pretty high immunisation uptake rate. Only about 2% of people actually don't immunise for a lot of reasons. This particular ad uses the people like me are right bias. There's like a proper name for it. You've heard it. You've probably heard it in a conversation that talks about, I don't know, changing diversity, say in technical fields. You know, I'm right. You know how your brain's constantly telling you you're right? Except for when your brain tells you that you're constantly wrong, in which case I'm really sorry. Your brain's not necessarily doing what it could be doing to support you as well as it could be at that time. We've all been there. But most of the time, human brains, one of our survival mechanisms is to assume that we're doing things right. Yep. And if I'm right, people who agree with me are also right. People who are like me are right because they agree with me. That's kind of how it goes. And so whether I notice it or not, I'm more likely to listen to somebody that I identify with that I think is like me. Yep. This campaign was actually really successful. About like 77% of the people who came in contact with it, and it was everywhere, billboards, public spaces, all over the place, came away thinking that actually vaccines were okay and sought more information and generally felt better about the concept of it, whether they came from alternative lifestyles, let's just skip over what that phrase means, or not. So like 77% of people said that it had a positive impact. 59.2% actually thought that it had a really, really serious positive impact. 24% said no impact. Here's the cool thing. 16.8% of the people that came with this ad and participated in the survey about it said that it had a negative impact. Said that actually they just felt worse about everything. Vaccine-hesitant participants reported more negative thoughts and feelings in response to the campaign than non-hesitant individuals. Okay, let's translate that. People who already thought vaccines were bad, anytime they saw this ad, they continued thinking the vaccines were bad. Here's another way to think about it. People that have negative associations with something, when they're reminded of the thing, they will feel bad, regardless of the context and regardless of the content. That's just going to happen. And any further exposure to the concept is going to make them feel bad. If I want people to change their behavior, I can't make them feel bad. And some people are just going to feel bad, and especially because I am the overpriced consultant that's coming into the workplace to tell them that CI is the way of the future and that they should totally do things differently and they should completely upheave their lives and change the relationships they have with everyone around them and go into new power structures that they don't understand and just have a whole new set of habits. They're going to see me as the physical representation of everything that is wrong right now, and I am their enemy, and I don't want that. And the facts don't matter. You know, I'm literally a doctor of mobile phones don't give you cancer, and I am literally quoting 70 years worth of research into how mobile phones don't give you cancer. And again, caveat, if you argue with, like, if you don't agree with me, please see me at a later time, not at the end of this talk. There is actually about 70 years worth of research since about World War II, when RF communication became a thing. That's when RF safety standards started developing. And all of the studies say more or less the same thing. So all of the facts make absolutely no difference. When I was in the RF field, I came into contact with a lot of people, and it didn't matter what we told them. They were unhappy, and people still lobby about it. It's because brains are complicated. I really like this brain. Somebody made it at a workshop I was at a few weeks ago. It's so cool. Like, it's such a cool way to make a brain. You know, just because I show Andrew all the data about how pairing works and doesn't work, makes no difference. Change is uncomfortable. Change you didn't choose is particularly uncomfortable. Change that comes with a whole heap of presentations about growth mindset that you didn't want to sit through is particularly uncomfortable. So what do? What doesn't work is telling people what they should do and that no, they're wrong, and saying you should do the thing, like using the word you. All these things, they don't work because I'm the enemy. Yep, doesn't matter what I say, everything I'm saying is wrong. Okay, so what works? What works is becoming part of the group. Again, using the bias of people identifying with me, at least to a point. And it doesn't have to be right, and it doesn't have to be complete. But if I am part of the group in any way, I can change what the group normal is. I can ask questions. Until I am considered a member enough of the group that I'm allowed to question its norms, it doesn't matter what I say or what I do, because I am external and I'm wrong. It's just what brains do. Having conversations makes a difference. Having open-ended conversations with the open questions, that's what makes a difference. Sometimes that's not even good enough. Sometimes, you know, did anyone / everyone go and see Oren's talk yesterday? Because if you didn't, you should have. Yeah. Oh, were you there, Oren? Aw. Oh, yeah, you showed a photo of yourself being there. So, like questions like, what do you want? Questions like, what's wrong here? You know, you're basically asking something like, show me where it hurts and let me help you. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Creating positive associations with yourself, that helps. One of the things that I do, I actually do this for a totally different reason, is I walk around to everyone I'm working with on a Friday and I go, what have you done this week that you're proud of? And I make sure people have thought of something, because there's actually always something that you've done this week that you can be proud of, and you get a sticker for it. That's not why I do it, but one of the side effects is that it creates a positive associations in people's minds. This is how dumb brains are. They just do this thing where, like, they make associations and then you use them and then they get used. These tools are being used against you or for you by other people. You can also choose to use them against or for other people. You can also choose to use them against yourself. You know, create positive associations with things you don't like. So, you know, instead of I'm right and you're wrong, you can ask other kinds of questions, and that's both for yourself and other people. Find better motivators. Shame and guilt, they'll only get you so far. In some workplaces, they're the things that get you really far. Like, a lot of workplaces have a culture of mismatched power dynamics and aggressive conversations and aggressive ownership. And in those kinds of places, it's really hard to build friendships and to build vulnerability without becoming someone else's enemy. You know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing. Some of the things that happen there is just automatically falling into contempt culture, and going into one of those workplaces definitely comes into working with ending up in the situation where everything is about a shame or a guilt or contempt for someone else. One of the ways in which I fell into this much early in life is going, well, I don't know how many of you were told that you were smart as a kid. I was, and it kind of messed me up, to the point where I thought that, well, if I'm smart, then I'm right, and people who don't know things that I know are clearly wholesale wrong. And I just wrote them off completely, and it was really stupid because a lot of people who don't know things that I know actually know a lot of other things. And it's one of the ways in which our brains try and have contempt culture, because we're all taught to do it. Doesn't mean we have to do it. Talking to people, you know what, there are some percentage of the population that I said, you know, they just will not engage with what you've got to say. They will not engage with the facts because it's not about the facts. Most people's minds can be changed about some things. Most people's minds can be changed about most things. Not all of the things. Sometimes it's really worth choosing your battles and going, well, Gary's retiring in 3 months. I'm not even going to bother. It's actually worth it not spending energy on things that you know are not going to work. Now, here's the thing. People only do things that make sense to them. Yeah, I know that sounds really dumb, like obviously. Except if somebody is doing something or wanting something, that probably means they have a reason. And if I don't know what that is, I'll never figure out how to get anything moving, either with them or with me. One of the other things I've learned is that actually, if I want to change people's minds, a lot of the time I have to make a choice in every conversation about being right or having a good relationship. And often it's much more about having a good relationship with them than being right. And I don't need to be 100% right, and this conversation doesn't need to end up at the truth. It doesn't need to be about all of the different ways in which having a pipeline is much better than not having one. It can be a really early conversation, and moving things a little bit is much better than not moving it at all. And a lot of the time what I've found is that, especially in conservative groups and conservative organizations, there's a lot of 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back. That's so much further than the 0 steps forward it was before I was there. And change takes a really long time. It takes a very lot of exposure to new concepts for people to even consider moving them. The Overton window moves over time and through a lot of repeated exposure and through a lot of exposure to the extremes, like to the radical ends. Once something is considered radical, something a little closer to it is considered more normal. In order to have the conversation with people about things that I think are right, I've kind of learned about this one. I don't know if you've seen it. You've got to pick at least 2. Before I say anything, is it true, is it kind, is it useful? At least 2 of those have to be true for me to say it. Doesn't mean I'm always following my own advice, as much as I can. Do I want to be right, or do I want this person to listen to me? Is it even worth my while saying anything? As you might have heard from Oren the Time Traveler, tech problems are about humans, and humans are way more than their tech, and being rational is not different to being emotional. And it doesn't matter whether you think something's right. You know, you've been in that situation where I really want something and I know it's dumb and I know it's wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway. Yeah? Who's done that? Yeah. Yeah. How did that work for you? Doesn't matter, you did it anyway. Yeah? Because that's your ROI. Like, what's the return for you? The return is usually much more about the feelings than it is about the thought. And here's a really cool thing you can do. You know how like I was talking about the biases, okay? You can change your own bias, as in you can choose which bias you're going to work with. People talk about addictions this way, for example. You can't, like, it's very hard to change habits or addictions. We don't get rid of them, we replace them with a different habit or a different addiction. Basically, you choose which problems you want to have. Some problems are you're willing to have. Everything's got problems, everything's got consequences. If I want my bias to be different, I have to put myself in a situation where I'm being exposed to the concepts that verify my the bias I want much more than the kinds of places that verify the bias I don't want. I can choose which groups I go to. I can choose where I spend my time. That's how I do it for myself, but I can also do it for other people. Like I can change the bias and I can change the content of the conversation around other people. Ultimately, actually, what's it all about? Ultimately, a lot of the time my work as a consultant is in places that put pictures on the internet and get people to buy them. And whether that's home loans or widgets or something else, actually it's about what brings you joy. Just remember that like your ROI is about you as well. You know, like when this all gets too much, do what brings you happiness. This is what brings me happiness, big balls of yarn. You might have seen me walking around with them. Yes, a lot of them are the colour of your hair, Oren.
It's a good colour.
It is a good colour, thanks. I think I'm going to stop there, thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Unfortunately, we don't have any time left for questions.